Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new Crossed Up early on a Memorial Day. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel, and for the first time in a very long time, we get to talk about a weekend that was not so great for the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, I think we need to put the old disclaimer on this conversation. It's the first time in 15 series that they did not win or tie. So you have to go all the way back to early April. Certainly losing 2 out of 3 to the Rockies is not an ideal outcome. I'm not really impressed with that Colorado team. But things are going to happen, and it's baseball. And with all that said, let's bring in Anthony here and rip this team apart. Damn it! Because how do you lose 2 out of 3 to the Colorado Rockies? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Everyone.
Well, no, I mean, you're kidding, and you should be kidding because, I mean, you're going to lose series eventually, right? I mean, it was going to happen. They haven't lost one since the first week of the year, so it was almost 2 months since they've lost a series. So it's really hard to be immensely critical of the Phillies, but at the same time, this is the worst team in the National League, and you just lost a series to them. And if it wasn't for the heroics of Edmundo Sosa and Garrett Stubbs on Saturday night, you got swept. You would have gotten swept by this team. Yeah. That's not good. And so it's like, okay, let's rein it in. You had a bad series, got a little bit. There's reasons for it. Probably we can break them down and look at individual players and scenarios and situations and identify what went wrong. But you don't let it fester now. I mean, now you're going to play a Giants team who has been playing better baseball. I know they blew a game yesterday.
Boy, did they. Boy, did they yesterday. My goodness.
But they've been playing better baseball since you swept them in Philadelphia a few weeks ago. And it's not going to be an easy series. Never is out in San Francisco. The Phillies never play well there. So you got to get it right. And you got to win this series. Got to win 2 out of 3. And you come home and say, all right, it was a 500 road trip. Wasn't the greatest, but we'll take it. We're still going to be 6 games up at that point, likely. And we'll come back home and lick the wounds and refresh.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You look ahead to today's game. You have Blake Snell for the Giants, who's just been a disaster. Obviously, he missed a lot of time. His first start back, post-injury, not very good. And the Giants are favored today, minus 120 at home, which again just speaks to really odds makers. Just every time Taijuan Walker takes the ball, odds makers just do not really have a lot of faith in him right now. I don't know if fans do. I don't know if we do, but odds makers certainly do not. It was a little bit of a rough weekend. And I think that the thing, if you're being honest, and while acknowledging that it's going to happen, you're going to have series, even against bad teams, where you're just not playing your best baseball. I think the thing that I was sort of agitated by was just the lack of offense. I mean, really outside of one inning, like you said, the 9th inning on Saturday night, Philly's offense did very little against 3 starting pitchers that I'm not particularly impressed by, especially the first 2. Cal Quantrill is going through a lot of struggles, but he's been very good now against the Phillies twice this season. And if you really look at his game log, he's been consistently pretty stellar for the Rockies this season. I'll tell you what, if I were the Atlanta Braves, I'd be real interested in bringing in Cal Quantrill the way that he's thrown the ball against his team now in 2 starts. I just was a little bit surprised out there in that park against that pitching staff that the Phillies didn't have a little bit more for those guys. And I don't know that I really want to get into the weeds too much. I don't know that I really want to dive into the specifics and rip apart every single guy who didn't have a good weekend, but I just kind of found it strange. I think that there's certainly the ebb and flow. You're not going to be able to maintain this high level of play series after series after series. It's inevitable that you're going to have regression. It's inevitable that you're going to put together some bad games, but just was a really kind of a flat weekend for the Phillies this past weekend. And like you said, I think the concern isn't so much what just happened. Like, I can't read into anything on those 3 games. They got a couple decent starts by Christopher Sanchez and Aaron Nola. Ranger Suarez was not sharp yesterday in the first 2 innings. I know he gathered himself and he was pretty effective. What do you want to do? You want to get on here today and talk about, are you concerned with Ranger Suarez? I don't have that gear in me this morning.
And the one thing we should put into perspective with pitching, with the starting pitchers especially. So the Phillies have starting pitchers. We've talked about how their starting pitchers are not power pitchers. They're more finesse pitchers. They're more location, and they pitch differently than a lot of teams. And the three guys that pitched out in Colorado, Sanchez, Nola, and Suarez, are guys that really do rely on off speed to kind of be, to guide them through their outings. And you try and throw those pitches in Denver, man, you got to adjust. It's a weird thing to say. It takes a minute. It takes a minute to kind of figure that out, right? And you saw in all three starts, the early innings were trouble for all three guys. And then once they kind of figured it out, I know Sanchez didn't really get an extended outing. He got pulled early. But, he did you could see he started to find it a little bit. Nola definitely found it. Suarez definitely found it. I think he went 1, 2, 3 the last 4 innings of the game or that he was in. So, you got to sit there and take it with a grain of salt a little bit. Say, you know what? These guys didn't particularly pitch bad. Yes, Suarez had a rougher outing than the other two, but at the same time, take into consideration why and say, all right, we put that one in the back, in the back pocket, forget about it for now. Let's see how they look their next start out. If they look fine their next start out, yeah, you just chalk it up to it's crazy to pitch in Colorado sometimes.
Well, look, I mean, for as bad of a weekend as the Phillies had, it pales in comparison to the weekend that the Atlanta Braves had. They did avoid a sweep yesterday afternoon, but in doing so, they lost Ronald Acuna Jr. for the season with a torn ACL. And if you listened to us last week, we were talking about the playoff odds and Phillies odds to win the division, some of the projections at Fangraphs and Baseball Reference. And I will tell you this, things have been just totally blown up here over the weekend now with Acuna out. Obviously, the Phillies did not lose or gain ground over the 3 games because both teams lost 2 out of 3. But with Acuna out, Fangraphs, we were talking about how Fangraphs kind of hates the Phillies. And even as late as last Friday, the Braves had a 52% chance to win the NL East, even with a sizable deficit. Well, if you look this morning, the deficit is the exact same, but the Phillies now have a 60% chance of winning the East at Fangraphs. And over the weekend, the Phillies actually became favored for the first time to win the National League East at both DraftKings and FanDuel. And even though the Braves shaved the game off of that lead yesterday morning, the Phillies were minus 130 to win the division at FanDuel. This morning, they're minus 200. And all of this is a roundabout, elongated way of saying that this Acuna injury is devastating to the Braves' chances, at least on paper and at least by the math.
It is. And I know everybody's going to say, well, when he tore his ACL on his right knee a couple of years ago, they went on and won the World Series. And they do have a great GM in Alex Anthopoulos who will go out and find players that can, maybe not one player, but multiple players who, when you combine what they can produce for you, will be able to make up some of what they lost in Acuna. And he'll also get somebody to probably make up some of what you're losing in Strider. So the Braves are still going to be the Braves. They're still going to be a playoff team. They're still going to be right there, and they're going to be dangerous, right? They're not going to be an easy out by any stretch of the imagination. But do I think that this makes the path a little bit easier for the Phillies to actually hold on and win the division? I do. We talked last week and said that, we still think the Phillies are going to win the division, but we don't think that the race is going to be over by any means. We think the Braves are going to get back into it, and it's going to be close. Now, I'm not saying the Braves won't get back into it, but I think that there's a better chance that the Phillies are able to keep a cushion. I don't know if it swells to 13, 15 games like, Atlanta's did a couple last year or 2 years ago, but I do think that the Phillies can maintain this cushion of that 6 to 8 to 10 games, with this injury to Acuna. So it's bad for baseball, Bob. I mean, I don't want to just say, hey, it's good for the Phillies because
it is, but we're not celebrating this.
No.
This is not what you want to see. It's not good for the sport. You don't want to see guys that have generational talent get injured like this. There's really nothing good about this. There isn't. What's interesting is you start to wonder about what now moving forward Ronald Acuna is. I mean, this is 2 torn ACLs. He was not in the midst of a great season as it were. I mean, 192 at bats. He's hitting 250 with a 716 OPS. One of the things we talked about last week was that at some point he was going to go off and be that guy that we expected him to be. And if you were bullish on the Braves, it was sort of centered around underperformance of key players, Austin Riley, Matt Olson, Ronald Acuna Jr., even Ozzie Albies has been a little bit down this season. I just wonder, not only with the 24 Braves, like how much can you really take? How much can you withstand on the injury front between Strider and Acuna? And now you get off to a bad start. You look up, it's Memorial Day, you're 6 games back. That's a lot to overcome as it is. But then you look ahead and you start to wonder about what Ronald Acuna Jr. will be. I understand that he's not an NFL running back and that in theory you can survive 2 torn ACLs, but he hasn't been the same player this season. I know he was good last year. I'm not saying that his underperformance this season was because of his knee, but like this is real now. Like this is a guy with a pretty substantial injury history, and like he looked like a surefire Hall of Famer for a few years here. And I do wonder what this means for him and the Braves moving forward.
Yeah, I wonder if he becomes more of a designated hitter for them moving forward, just to kind of not to say that he's a bad outfielder, because he's not bad. He's not great, but he's not bad. But just kind of limit the opportunities for him to have injury situations arise. I know last night's happened on the bases, but keep him off of his feet and just get up there and do damage offensively and be that guy instead. I wonder if that's a direction that they kind of go in. If I'm not mistaken, I got to look it up. But I think this is Ozuna's walk year. And with the year he's having, wouldn't surprise me if somebody else threw money at him. And so then maybe you sit there and go, well, if you're the Braves, you just, hey, look, we just went and traded for Jared Kelenic, right? Who's actually been a pretty good player for them, better than he was in Seattle. And he, to me, becomes a plug and play guy in your lineup. And now Acuna could slot into that DH role, right? I mean, basically just kind of, you could go that route, and maybe that preserves him and he can get back to being the player that he was. But yeah, it's not good for baseball, and it's ultimately going to lead to when we get to one last thing today, Bob. There's something I kind of want to talk about with the sport that this kind of leans into a little bit. So I won't go too far with it, but I think that it's just not good for them. And I hope Acuna gets back, because I think he's an electric player. I like watching him play. I know fans got on him a little bit during the playoffs, and that's fun and that's fine. And I encourage fans to continue to get on him in the future, because that's what makes the rivalry so great. But there's nothing good about him not being able to play, even if it benefits the Phillies.
I'll be honest with you. If the Phillies don't have a great series out in San Francisco and certain guys struggle over the next few games, we could take a week and say that was not a good week for the Phillies. And let's dive into that in a little bit more detail. I think that there are some players right now in this moment as we're talking where you're like, ooh, not awesome at the moment. Like we talked about Schwarber last week, and the batting average is up. He was on base a ton Saturday night. It's kind of more of a continuation of that conversation where you're like, well, he's doing a lot of things well, but where's the power? But I don't want to have that conversation right now. I just don't want to come on here after a one bad series and start picking apart guys and talking about, well, what could be wrong moving forward? What should we have anxiety over? What are the red flags? I don't want to do it. I don't think anybody wants to hear that either. So rather than do that, let's at least get another 3 games on the table before we start doing that. Rather than do that, what I want to do is talk about how does this injury to Ronald Acuna impact perhaps the Phillies' thought process, if at all, and the way that they will maneuver come July. That's the conversation I want to have today.
Okay.
So let me set the table by saying this. The Phillies blew what was an all-time opportunity, I thought, last October to win a championship. It was all in front of them. I am absolutely convinced that they would have beat the Texas Rangers in the World Series. All they had to do was win 1 game, 2 shots at home against a shitty, 84-win Diamondbacks team, and they couldn't do it. And we all sort of felt like, wow, maybe the 24 Phillies will be better, but they'll never have a better opportunity to win a championship than they had in those 2 days to kind of move forward and get it done. Well, here we are. You have a big lead in the East. It's almost a foregone conclusion that you will make the postseason. The team that's won 100-plus games, it feels like year after year after year, who's had just a death grip on this division, is depleted by injury. Do you just add a little right-handed bat and maybe another guy to the bullpen mix? Or do you look at this and say, we will never have a better opportunity than we do right now? And it's not just about a tweak, it's about making a move that just, what the Dodgers did this offseason, where it was like, oh, look at them, with Yamamoto, and they're going out and they're getting Glass now, and they're all in. The Dodgers, holy shit, they won the offseason. Like, the Phillies come to July and say, you know what, like, let's fucking step on it and go get this. What do you think that, like, how do you think they're starting to view? I'm not saying who are they going to get, but like, do you think that the philosophy come July is going to be like, it's go time, baby?
Yeah, I do, and I think that for one, I'm not going to say they're going to go nuts at the deadline, but I do think that you could get one bigger ticket item and figure out a way to make it work. I know you got to watch the money, right? You don't want to go over certain luxury tax thresholds. I get all that, but I mean, I think that you look at it and say, this is the season. This is it. You've gotten off to the start because you've proven that this is it, and you wanted to be this all-time team, and you're on pace to break a franchise record, obliterate a franchise record for wins in the season, and your chief rival is got a bunch of injuries now. And if you look at the Dodgers, they've just lost 5 in a row, right? They don't look good at all. And the biggest warts for the Dodgers are coming through.
They can't hit.
Bottom of their lineup is not good.
Those first 4 guys in that lineup, and it's it.
The bottom of their lineup is not good. Their starting pitching is mediocre, right? And their bullpen is okay, but I mean, it's not anything special. And so you look around the National League, Bob, what's your competition going to be? Like, the Phillies should have a clear path to the World Series. Now, of course, once you get to the World Series, then things could be a little bit more difficult. I think there's some good teams in the American League. But at the same time, that you are trending in a great direction to be the team in the World Series this year.
And look,
you have to go for
plenty of examples. There's plenty of cautionary tales. We saw what the Braves did last year, 104 wins, and they get bounced by the Phillies. Hell, look at the Phillies' own history. Go back to 2011. Talk about the all-time franchise record for wins in a season. 83 win Cardinals team wipes them out. It's not to say that the Phillies are going to be immune to similar mishaps. It's not. It could very well happen. But just in terms of sitting here on Memorial Day, 2 months in, looking at where this franchise is, looking at how several of its key players are either in their prime or maybe about to exit prime, it's not that I don't think that they will make the playoffs in 25. I have no idea what that looks like. I'm not saying that the window is shut after this season, but where they stand right now, it just feels to me like you're seeing the beginnings of a perfect storm in which it's time to take advantage. And you blew it last year. You ran the same team back. They've proven that was a wise decision. But I just think when you look at how the postseason played out last year against the Diamondbacks, when you look at how the World Series played out 2 years ago, we know that this team's really good and it's going to win a lot of games, but I want to insulate myself from the uh-ohs and mishaps and weirdness of the postseason as much as I can. And I think that they're going to have opportunities to do it. And I'd like to see them do something more than an add and a tweak. I'd like to see wow, here we go. Something where Bryce Harper walks into the locker room the day that this transaction gets made and he says, Dan, these guys are all in. Like, now the organization's really all in. Yeah. And I know it, and we know it, and it's almost like a rallying point for them. That's what I want to see. And I know that I'm talking theoretically here. I'm not even mentioning a certain player. I don't know if that's Mason Miller. I don't know if it's insert a game-changing all-star caliber outfielder here. I mean, I think that those are the two obvious things. Like, that's what I want to see. I think that's kind of what I want to see.
Yeah, and I think it's doable. You don't want to. I mean, you have some of your prospects who have not really had good years.
Yeah, man, Mick Abel. It's like people are like, "Do you think the Phillies are going to trade Mick Abel?" I'm like, I think the Phillies would trade Mick Abel in a heartbeat. What are you getting from Mick Abel right now?
Right. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say. Like that's a kind of guy. Like, yeah, move on, go ahead. If that's what it takes to get that player that you're talking about, yeah, we'll put him in. We'll put him and then any other minor league, whatever you want. Like, you go ahead and you do it. Maybe not Aiden Miller. Maybe that's the one that you don't you know, and obviously Painter, right, because he's hurt. But maybe those are the two guys you kind of hold on to. But like if you say to me Justin Crawford has to be added into that trade to get that star outfielder, whoever it is, I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, you could take them. Take those two guys. Take the next tier prospect down. You want that Gabriel Rincones, whoever. You can have them. Have all these guys. The only ones I really want to hang on to in my mind are Painter and Miller, and then everybody else you can kind of play with and go ahead and we'll make the push. That's what I think that has to happen, and I think that they will. I do think that they will, Bob. I think Dombrowski was in Reading this weekend. Why? Like why?
Because he doesn't like Denver? No, I know why.
Like, what do you like? I mean, and not that Reading has any like top prospects pitching it there right now. Like the Phillies' best prospects are all really still in Single A. A couple of them obviously are up in Triple A, but there's not a lot at Reading right now. Why is he there? Like,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like, you're probably having preliminary conversations with teams at this point. You're 2 months out from the trade deadline. It's Memorial Day weekend. It's like usually the time when teams start saying, yeah, if we get to this point, this guy could be available. This guy, like these are when those initial emails are going back and forth between general managers, presidents of baseball operations, whatever, and saying, yeah, if we're out of it, this guy could be available. And then you're like, okay, now let me go check out my guys and see who I would move if need be to get
right.
So like that to me is important to understand why that's happening. I do think that you're spot on with this. I do think that the Phillies will push for a bigger name than they did a season ago at the deadline.
And now on the flip side of that, we talk so much about chemistry and the dynamics of this clubhouse. If you're going to do a move like this, I think that a reliever, it's not quite as, I don't think that the impact is quite the same, right? Like if you bring in a big time bullpen arm, you are going to do that at the expense of who? I don't want to single anybody out. It's not about taking a shot at that guy, but like it's one of your current lower leverage relievers. I don't think that alters any dynamic of the Phillies clubhouse. Would you agree with that?
I agree. Okay. I mean, I even think even with a position player, I don't think it alters the dynamic of the clubhouse.
So let's get to that though. Like if you're adding a position player, who is that likely to be at the expense of? I think it's got to be one of three players right now. And I'll pause for a second and say, I guess there is an asterisk that you could put next to this. It's probably Whit Merrifield or Christian Pache or Johan Rojas, right?
Yeah. I mean, you assume Cody Clemens is going down once Turner comes back. Right. So that you assume that's the switch. And so then one of those three guys, the one thing I could say is one of those guys could be in a package trade for this player. The other thing that you could say is you have an option on Rojas. So Rojas could go down and you don't have to really lose him. You can kind of keep him in the organization, but you can send him down to bring someone else up. So you're probably talking one of those guys. I know that it's funny because we talk about the most liked guys in the locker room, and it's funny that the two most liked players are probably the guys in roster spots 25 and 26 right now, and that's Pache and Stubbs. They're the two most liked guys in that clubhouse. And so maybe that chemistry element for those two is what keeps them here. Maybe. I'm not saying that has to be a reason, but you can justify that if you're upgrading somewhere else. If Pache is your fifth outfielder and you're replacing Rojas and he stays in your system, or if you move on from Whit Merrifield who can't even get in the lineup anymore, he wasn't part of that group for the last 2 years, that wouldn't impact the clubhouse as much. So I think you're probably right. It's one of those three guys for sure.
So let me ask you this. What do you think is the more likely thing that they do? I think in some capacity, they're going to address both. I think that they're going to add a reliever and an outfield bat. But if you had to go out and say like they get one move of huge consequence, what do you think it's more likely to be? Because in this moment right now, I'll run ahead of you and give you my opinion first. In this moment, I can work in my mind with the strength and the depth of the Phillies starting rotation. I think that there is a world where you have your four primary relievers right now, and you bet on a guy like Dominguez and or Soto kind of getting back on track, and you say, I think we can win it with this group. Like, I think you can win a World Series with this current pitching staff without an addition to it. I believe that. I am not absolutely sure in this moment on May 27th that the Phillies can win or will, I don't want to say will win, but can reasonably expect the Phillies to win a World Series with what they have in the outfield and with Kyle Schwarber not hitting for any power. And this is a roundabout way. Like, this is not a criticism of Kyle Schwarber directly, but when I just look at the entire offensive picture, if Kyle Schwarber is not going to hit 40 home runs, Brandon Marsh isn't going to hit left-handed pitching, and Johan Rojas isn't going to hit left or right-handed pitching, and Christian Pache is going to hit 220 for you, and Nick Castellanos is going to either be, good for a month, bad for a month, and we don't know what we're going to get. That outfield plus DH dynamic to me leaves a little bit to be desired. And for that reason, I feel like that is the area that's screaming, bring a difference maker.
Yes, I think that the outfield is the bigger need. We know that the top 4 guys in the bullpen are really reliable. And one thing, we talked, if you remember, beginning of the year when we did our stick your neck out predictions, one of my stick your neck out predictions was that Dominguez was going to be the guy who gets the last out of the World Series. And it's interesting. I know he's far from that right now.
They're protecting an 8-1 lead in Game 5. Maybe they send him out there. Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing, right? We want to criticize the guy, and deservedly so, for the way he started the season. This month, in 8 appearances, he's got a 1.17 ERA and batting at 172 batting average against. Only allowed 5 hits in 7 2/3 innings, 6 strikeouts. He's not been bad. He still needs to be a little bit more consistent because of the walks, right? You need a little bit more consistency on the strikes. 4 walks in 7 2/3 innings is not great, right? It's too many, but you're starting to see it kind of come back a little bit. I think that it's been a slow progression with him. He's worked on a new grip on the slider, which is in the last couple of outings has looked better. Against Colorado, both games that he pitched against the Rockies, I've liked how the sliders look, the shape of it. So you watch that and you sit there and go, yeah, maybe he could become that 5th guy, because he should be. He's got the stuff to be the 5th guy. And so you add him to that mix. If he gets there and you have 2 more months to make this determination, even if you add to the bullpen, you're probably just adding along the fringe of the bullpen and not necessarily looking for a hammer, at the back end. So if that's an important thing. So that can dictate that. As a result, what you then need more than anything else is the outfielder. And I don't disagree with you. Castellanos has not gotten there yet. And again, he's another guy you say, you give him another couple months. If he's not there, man, you absolutely need the outfielder for sure. Marsh is fine against right-handed pitching. Totally fine against right-handed pitching. Can't play against lefties. And you have an absolute dead zone in center field that the guy whoever plays center field can't hit in your lineup. So yeah, that's where you really need somebody to come in. And I think that's where the Phillies will look at.
And I think you need to, at some point, add, because I don't know that I can expect the Phillies infield to continue to produce at the level that it has. I mean, Bryce Harper's Bryce Harper. I'm good with that. I think that Real Muto, what you're getting out of him from an entire season perspective, I think it's realistic to feel that he could possibly maintain his overall production. Maybe not exactly the production we've seen over the last 20 games, but to this point, what he's done, I think you could say, all right, I could see that. Alec Boehm is a consistent hitter, and he's a consistent run producer. Is he going to continue to play like a fringe MVP? I don't know. I guess I'm not going to bank on that, and it's not a criticism of him. Is Edmundo Sosa going to continue to play at an all-star level in the absence of Trey Turner? Is Trey Turner going to come back and hit the ground running and hit 360? I don't know. We've seen Bryson Stott, ice cold, smoking hot, ice cold. I want to protect myself a little bit more. I think the Phillies have enough to win the division. I think that the Phillies currently have enough to make a run in the postseason. They might even have enough to win a World Series. They do. If you look at all the other teams that we're talking about right now, all these teams have holes. All these teams have weaknesses. Look how well the Yankees have played so far, right? They've been really good. They don't even have Garrett Cole in that mix. Starting rotation's been really good for them. Go around, look at the Yankees infield, and then just match it up against the Phillies. Right now, you'd say the Yankees and Phillies are the 2 most likely teams to make the World Series, just based on current records and what we know.
Mhm.
Phillies kicked their ass all across the infield. You take the Phillies in every single position in the infield and starting rotation and probably bullpen too. Go to the outfield though, and things start to kind of switch back the other way a little bit. You know what I mean? So like, I just look at it and say like, if you're the Yankees, you're feeling really good. You're like 20 games over 500, but the Yankees have deficiencies. So if you're looking at through the New York lens, like, how do we win the World Series? How do we get past a team like the Phillies? You're saying, oh my God, like they're better than us at every infield position right now. So point being, like every team has weaknesses. Every team has concerns. I think the Phillies have enough to do it. I want to know the Phillies have enough to do it. And I think that there's enough question marks out there in the outfield right now that I can't definitively say like, yeah, like this team is just, it's a unit. Like right now, there are some weaknesses. There are. And it's okay to say that. Like, because they lost 2 out of 3 this weekend. Like, that's, the reality is like, there could be some issues out there. Address them.
Yeah, I agree. 1,000%. And you do a comparison with the Yankees, and I look at the Yankees too, and I look at that team, and I say, are they in the same? I look at them the same way we're talking about the Phillies. Like, what do they need? Where do what do they need to address? Because they've got some pitchers that are pitching way over their heads right now.
Yeah,
way over their heads. And like, come on, let's
like Stroman, who has a track record, has been good in the past, but like, he's been great for them. Is he that guy right now? Is he that guy for another 20 starts? Like, I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean Nestor Cortez, Carlos Rodon, Clark Schmidt, those guys have been like pitching their asses off. Luis Gil, like who?
Gil's been really good.
Yeah, like who are you? Like, they've been so good, and you sit there and go, are they for real? Like, I don't see it. I personally just don't see it. All right. You don't just suddenly.
No team in the AL has allowed fewer runs than the Yankees this season. The bullpen's been pretty good too. And you look at Baltimore, a team that you and I both love, and the team that we both picked to win the AL. A lot of good young players, but like the Orioles season to date has not gone according to plan. And I don't just mean that in terms of Jackson Holiday failing to come up and really make an impact and then being sent back down. The Orioles are having a ton of bullpen problems. They've had injuries in the starting rotation. Some of these guys that they're relying on offensively haven't exactly been as good. Gunnar Henderson's been phenomenal. But other than that, like, some of these guys really haven't had big offensive years. They're still 15 games over 500. They're still going to be a playoff team. They might even win that division, but it hasn't been a stampede to 105 wins for the Orioles like I kind of thought it might be. So, I mean, they have a weakness. There's nobody else. I mean, I don't know the way that you look at it, but I go across the AL. I know that the Guardians have been outstanding. The Royals have been outstanding. I don't really know if I believe in either of those teams to this extent. Like, are the Guardians going to play at a 680 win pace like for the remainder of the year? Like, I don't know. Like, I just look out there, like the West is a disaster in the AL right now. I mean, Seattle, I think, is probably the best team at the moment, but not by much. And then you look at the NL. We all know the deal in the NL. I mean, the NL kind of stinks, man. Like the NL is so bad that the Cardinals, who I don't really believe very much in, have won 8 out of their last 10, and they find themselves very much in the conversation, the NL playoff picture all of a sudden. Like, that's how mediocre the NL has been once you get past the Dodgers, the Phillies, and to a lesser degree, the Braves. The sport lacks.
We're getting it's really, really close to one last thing.
All right, well, then let's just do it. We don't need to go an hour today. Let's just hit it.
I mean, this is kind of where I wouldn't go with one last thing, because I think it's a concern for the sport. So this is my one last thing topic. Like, there is so much mediocrity in baseball right now. And are we trending toward 500 teams? You're going to play 162 games, and you're going to get 500 teams in the playoffs, maybe even potentially a sub 500 team into the playoffs after 162 games. And then the format is set up as such to help those teams, as opposed to the teams that get time off because of a quote unquote bye. Like, are we trending towards just having mediocre baseball again in the World Series like we had last year? Like, is that is it like, to me, Phillies or Dodgers versus Yankees or Orioles would be awesome. Like either one, any matchup that you put, any kind of combination of those four teams, you're going to get a great World Series. Okay, in my mind, so good. But you could look at it and say there are so many mediocre 500 teams that if any one of them pulls an upset, which is easy to do in a short series, as we've seen, are we excited in any stretch of the imagination of a World Series that features, like, I don't know, like you mentioned, the Cardinals and the Twins? Like,
I mean, look, right now there is a world where the Pirates, the Nationals, like these are teams that like could a month from now be sniffing around and have a chance. Like you look at the Nationals, right? They've lost what, 5 of 6 to the Phillies this year?
yeah.
Is that correct? So that means that the Nationals are 22 and 22 and 23 against all teams that aren't the Phillies. Like they're a 500 team. That puts you right there. The Pirates, their starting pitching's been pretty good. Just beat the Braves 2 out of 3. Here comes Paul Skeens. I don't know. Like, are we talking about them as a playoff team? Arizona did this last year. They're not that good. They're kind of hanging around. Maybe Jordan Montgomery gets a little bit better for them. They go on a run. Maybe. The Cardinals stink.
Yeah.
They're right there.
Here's the thing, Bob.
Stink. They're right there. I mean,
you say right there. It's the funny thing is the if you look at the wild card stand, and it's May 27th, but this is the first time people really are supposed to start, right? Memorial Day is when you're first supposed to start looking at the standings. Okay, so the NL wild card, the Braves are your top wild card team right now, of course. The Cubs are your second wild card team. They're a game over 500. They're a game over 5, and they're your second wild card team. The Padres and Giants are tied for the final wild card spot. They're both 500. Yeah. And the Cardinals are
the Mets have been an unmitigated disaster,
and they're only 4 out.
They're 4 games out of the final wild card spot. I mean, the Mets have been like laughably bad. They can't score. Lindor is a mess. Alonso's been okay. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a big time Mets fan, and I was like, I think that they have to strip the parts there. Like, I would call everyone about everyone, and they're 4 games out. They're a 6-0 week away from knocking on the door of a playoff spot.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time the Phillies and Mets play in London, the Mets could be there. Like, they could be in the postseason field. Like, it's crazy. It's bad.
So that's the thing. Like, how has it gotten to this point, Bob?
You know who's going to win the AL West? The Astros.
Yeah. The Mariners and Rangers let them hang around.
Yeah,
they let
3.5 games out after all that. As bad as they were.
Yeah, as bad as let them hang around.
It's good for you right now.
But like, what has baseball done this to itself? Like, what? You've gotten to a point where we've expanded the playoffs, we've sped up the games, everything's supposed to be more exciting, and all we've gotten is a lot of blah.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Is that because there are these like mega teams like the Dodgers and I guess at the moment the Phillies or the Yankees, and teams are just saying like, we can't build rosters this way, so like we're not going to be all in because these teams exist? Is it that? Or is that in combination with the fact that you see teams like the Diamondbacks last year get to the World Series? The Phillies the year prior weren't a dominant force, got to the World Series. Do you think with the expanded playoffs, teams just feel like, hey, we don't need to spend that much to get in and make a run, and also we don't need to try that hard to get in and make a run, so we can kind of be mediocre and just see what happens? And that's the sport now.
Yeah. And that's a shame. And that's because I think that's hurt the sport more than anything else, is the trend toward mediocrity. Because you're right, Bob. That's exactly what it is. By expanding the playoffs, what they've done is they've basically said you could just be around 500 for most of the season and then figure it out. Like, get to the deadline and say, all right, do we want to make this push or do we not want to make this push? Right? And you try. And then even then, you don't even need to do a lot at this point. Now it's just kind of like, all right, well, we get to there. If we're still within a couple games, we got a shot. All right, let's ramp it up now. Let's push our guys now to go a little bit little bit more, see if we get in, and then you can have a run like the Diamondbacks had a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, you even have the Yankees basically saying like our payroll is unsustainable moving forward. We're going to have to make adjustments to
I
it.
know. Did you see that Steinbrenner
It's the
said that?
Yankees, in the middle of a first place in the AL East run.
How do you sit there and say, because you're talking about Soto, who's the clear front runner for AL MVP so far. I mean, he's been sensational. He's been fantastic for the Yankees. And, you look at this guy, you're talking about a generational player, absolutely incredible player. How do you look at that and say, well, we don't want to keep this guy here? And you sit there and go, oh, no, we can't win going forward with this major payroll. So, we got to figure this out. It's like, what are you saying to the guy?
Yeah.
Like, what are you saying to that guy? That's unbelievable. And you're the New York Yankees, and you're saying that. So that's what baseball's got a problem, and it's really that. And the Dodgers are the evil empire because of what they've done. They've created this.
Are you of the mind that it should still be a 162 game season? I hear so many people bitch about the length of the season, and I get it in that like it's so diluted. Mediocrity will make the playoffs in some cases. Do you really need 162 games to get to that finish line? I always feel like, well, I love baseball and I want to see 162 games because I love the regular season. I love having it every night from March 28th to September 30th. And I want the game to have that same frame. I know the game's different. I know that the way it's played is different. So comparing stats from 1930 to 2024 doesn't really add up nowadays anyway. But I just like how it's uniform, and I don't really want to see a deviation from it. But like if someone tells me that maybe the season should be 130 games long, it's kind of hard from a logistical standpoint or a logistical argument to really say it's a terrible idea.
I just have a thing with the beauty of baseball is its ability to look at numbers across generations, right? And if all of a sudden you start cutting back, you've basically eliminated the discussion of everything that's happened in the past 150 years. Yeah. And so therefore it's basically like starting a new sport over again. Because everything moving forward you can only say, well, this was the record since since they changed to 130 game season. Like you can never compare generations ever again. So I'm not a big fan of it. You let the toothpaste out of the tube once they went from 154 to 162, and that's it. All right, and you got to stay there. They should never do more, but I think that they got to stay at 162. I think that's the way to go. I would consider amending the playoffs, in some way, and I'm not 100% sure what it is, but you can't make it so that the 500 teams are at an advantage. They've got to be at a disadvantage. And far be it from me to think that the NBA does something right, because I don't think it is right for the NBA, but I think that the concept of it might actually work better in baseball in the sense that you've played 162 games and that regular season should matter. So those wild card teams should be playing like a play-in style like the NBA has, like the four teams playing in that just get in, right? So maybe that's what you do, and have it so that it's not a best of three. It's like you know what, you didn't win your division, you're just barely sneaking in. Okay, you got a one game, boom, you got to win that game to get in, and then then you got to beat the next team one game to get in. And that's it. So it's like so you're not taking up so much time for the teams that won the divisions. I think that might be a little bit better way to go. I don't know, but the current setup is bad for the sport.
Yep. No, I'm with you on that. All right. Well, look, Phillies Giants this week in San Francisco. Phillies looking to bounce back after a rare series loss. We'll see. We've talked about how it's not a great place for the Phillies. We've also noted the odds makers aren't loving them in the opener. So we'll see what we are getting into this week. We'll be back on Friday to break it all down and talk about all the latest developments. And you can follow Anthony on X at AnsanPhilly. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. You can follow the show account on X as well at UpPhillies. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you get your shows. And we'll talk to you later this week.